So we hope that at least some of you, and I hope all of you, but we'll seek out Ed Tomasini. He's here from the Civic Center. We thank them for their cooperation. And he will be handling the cameras. In terms of thank yous, Marshall Carlson at the consistory was here, getting us set up, making sure all the light switches were. Ken Furlow, commander of the Legion, Arlo Spring Post, was in the color guard and has been very helpful in getting all this organized. Howard and Phyllis Lindstrom are here with a bunch of volunteers from the Legion. We want to thank them. Kristen Stein is here from the Fenton History Center, which I'll get to in just a minute. They are obviously interested in This Is History, and they're going to be selling this book. And they did sell the last edition of the book. So we hope that you'll say hi to Kristen, and I'll tell you what the terms of the book purchase are in a minute. But she's here to take any book sales today. I mentioned the Arts Council and Ed Tomasini and their cooperation today. Some friends of mine, Gail Betts and his brothers Bob and Dick Betts, their dad Art, some of you may have known from down in Kennedy, a Pacific War veteran in the Army, recently died, but they were down here this morning to move chairs around and help, and we're happy to have them here. And then my wife, who was a little reluctant, I must say, to do this book one more time, but we did it, and Jane, I thank you for your support, and I want to thank someone who is not here from our family. This new cover of this book, which I think is, when I decided to do the book again, the people in the book business said, you've got to have something new and different about the book, like a new cover. So we have a new cover. And Bud Fisher and his fighter pilot buddies are on the front of it this time. But Bart did this whole thing. I couldn't have done it without him. And if you see the word Sandy Bottom Press, it happens to be that I live on Chautauqua Lake at Sandy Bottom. And that's why it's called Sandy Bottom Press. But my son Bart is Sandy Bottom Press, as far as I'm concerned. So we want to thank Bart. So anyway, after we're done here today, veterans will be happy to sign books. If those of you here want to buy extra books, I have signed just the title page of the books that are there now, but I can put somebody's name on it or something if you'd like. And we're going to have, the Legion's going to have a fellowship hall reception, lemonade, cookies, coffee, that kind of thing. We just hope you'll hang around, especially if you're a spouse or with one of these veterans and you want to get them on that taping we're going to do. You may have to stay for a couple minutes, okay? So we want to thank the Legion for all of that. Why a third edition? I guess I want to just address that. We ran out of copies, number one. We sold out. In the prior two editions, we sold 2,500 copies. I shouldn't say we sold them. We probably gave away 300 or 400, let's face it. But we sold a lot of copies. Warren Berry up at Berry's Bookstore says, people don't sell that kind of copies of a book. That's a self-published book. And we sent copies all over this country. I mean, I don't know where people found out about the book, to be honest with you. But the people I deal with in Washington, I'm on the World War II Memorial Committee down there. They've read the book and they say it's better than Ambrose's book or Brokaw's book, And I don't, it's not because maybe it's better written, but I think it's more about the way the real world was. You mean the average hometown, the average guy and woman went off to war. And I think we tried to get a representation all across Pacific, Europe, China, Burma, India, and all kinds of pilots, infantrymen, Marines, and I think it gives people a good cross-section of what happened in America during the time. So thank you for doing this one more time. But the other thing we did in this edition, I thought we needed more focus on the Battle of the Bulge, and we have 6 veterans who came forward, and I tried to get them in different places in the Bulge, on the attack, on the shoulders, the counterattack in Bastogne. I think in 100 years from now, probably that battle will go down in history with Gettysburg, and I thought it should be more developed in the book. Another thing, we got an award. Joanne Schweik is here, and by the way, I mentioned her name, Joanne. I'd like you to give my editor a little hand, Joanne Schweik. You get another book, Joanne. Joanne was willing to go one more time down the trail with me, and does a terrific job as an editor, and I want to thank Joanne. But the Writer's Digest Award was her idea. Send it in, and we got an award. There were 362 books presented. There were 6 awards, and we got one. And so it's And then in my course of working on the World War II Memorial, I met Stephen Ambrose, the author of many World War II books that I have a great deal of respect for in Washington. And I sent him the book, and he wrote me a great letter back and said, hey, if you don't want to put something in your book next time, here it is. And so it's on the back, and it's also inside. But Stephen Ambrose. So I thought that would help us maybe sell enough books here to break even. But anyway, those are the reasons why we went ahead and did the 3rd edition. We're going to, I just want to give you a flavor of the Battle of the Bulge chapter. And let me read, one of the things that I did in the book that Brokaw doesn't do in his book is try to give the reader some background of why these veterans were in these places. Because even today, kids don't know where Guadalcanal is. They have no idea where Iwo Jima is. They don't know where Normandy is, some of them probably, And so I tried to lay the groundwork as to why we should be there. And let me just read you the background on the Battle of the Bulge a little bit and bore you, and then I'm going to have Tom come up with what happened to him holding the shoulder in the 1st Infantry Division. Tom's from Fredonia and is in the chamber over there, and I'm sure a lot of you know Tom from the North County. On December 16, 1944, the German army attacked with incredible force along an 80-mile front in eastern Belgium, near the border with Germany. It was an attack personally planned and supervised by Adolf Hitler in an attempt to save his regime. If he could slice between the American and British forces and reach the port of Antwerp, perhaps he could divide the Allies and seek a peace settlement to end World War II. The battle would end with over 80,000 casualties for the Allied side, killed, wounded, and captured, and another 100,000 similar casualties on the German side. What has become known as the Battle of the Bulge for many Americans has reached a level of significance close to that of the Civil War battle at Gettysburg. The Battle of the Bulge, unlike Gettysburg, which was a 2 or 3 day battle, lasted over 1 month and involved a German penetration or bulge of some 50 miles into American lines. However, despite poor intelligence and being ill-prepared for the attack, it also has become known as one of the great triumphs for American citizen soldiers. Stuck in the snows of the Ardennes Mountains in frigid temperatures, with bad weather shutting down air support, American soldiers of World War II fought and gave ground grudgingly, sometimes forced to surrender after food and ammunition ran out, sometimes surrounded for a short time at St. Vith and for a week at Bastogne. They remained defiant and unwilling to surrender and fought on against seemingly insurmountable odds. And it was snowing all the time. When I interviewed these guys this winter, it was a bad winter here. We are all that were here, remember it. And they'd look out the window and say, yeah, that's what it was like in the Bulge. So it was an appropriate winter to interview them, I thought. Finally, on Christmas Day, in an epic tank battle, the American 2nd Armored Division stopped the German 2nd Panzer Division in a confrontation on the farm fields surrounding Celles, Belgium. The 75th Infantry Division and other American forces joined in the counterattack. The skies also began to clear, and American planes began to hammer the German forces engaged in the battle. The Germans had to retreat or be cut off, but what really beat the enemy was the spirit of the American soldier, the willingness to bend and not break, to defeat Hitler and end the war so that he could get home to friends and family. A few weeks after the battle ended, Winston Churchill summed it up in a speech before the House of Commons when he called it America's greatest victory of the war. We are fortunate today to be able to see it through the eyes of 5 of the 6 are here today, and they were willing to tell us about it. So their stories are in this new edition, and I'm going to ask Tom Barisi. Tom was on the northern shoulder of the Bulge in the 1st Infantry Division. He actually saw a little more action later on as the fighting moved into Germany. But I thought It was an interesting story about how he got introduced to combat and what happened to him in the Bulge. So Tom, you go to the, down here, okay? And you can ad-lib if you want.
Thank you, Raleigh. We want to welcome all of you, fellow veterans. I'm really happy to be here, and at my age, I'm happy to be anywhere. I'm happy for my wife, Marilyn, who accompanied me and through the years has made me go straight. It's been a long time since an 18-year-old from Silver Creek, New York, was drafted into the Army. I can remember the train out of Dunkirk, the bus from Fredonia, and Buffalo Station was there with that big buffalo in the main entrance, and the train on our way to New York City, Camp Upton, and then a train to nowhere. No one knew where we were going. The rumors were flying around, and it was Fort McClellan, Alabama. But aside from that, about 3,000 of us are on the troop train, and one person came down with a case of the mumps, and that was me. I was sick all the way to Alabama. They had an ambulance waiting when the train stopped, rushed me to the hospital, and I was there about 3 or 4 weeks and recuperated, went into basic training. At 18 years old, you can almost do anything. I will never forget my introduction to combat. It was the start of the winter of 1944, and we had just been thrown in as replacements for the 1st Infantry Division. We were MOS 745, rifleman replacements. You couldn't get any lower than that. It was right before the Battle of the Bulge, and the unit was fighting in the Hurtgen Forest as part of the Ardennes. They sent us into the lines, and the first casualties I saw were bodies of 5 stiff, dead American soldiers stacked on top of each other. I didn't know what the hell to think. I think I wanted to go home, but I knew that we were in the war now. I hadn't really been prepared for a sight like that. The Germans inflicted a lot of casualties, thereby firing artillery into the tops of the trees. The splinters from the trees and the shrapnel killed a lot of our boys. I was only 19, you know, and we just didn't think it would happen to us. But when you see them laid out like that, you know that it could. After the initial fighting in the Hurtgen Forest, we were pulled back into Belgium for some rest. It was at this point that the lieutenant came to me and said, "Barisi, we don't have a squad leader for your squad. What training have you had?" Apparently, our squad leader had been killed or wounded. I told him I didn't have much training, just back home at Fort McClellan and Camp Van Dorn. Just like that, he offered me 3 stripes to me, and I said, "Okay, let's try it." And I became a sergeant overnight, which is absolutely crazy. What did I know about leading men at my age? They were just as frightened as I was. It was December by now, and we were supposed to be relaxing off the line. "Get yourselves a Christmas tree, guys," they said. So we did. We had a family who let us use their house, and we started to look forward to Christmas. We even had the Red Cross there giving us donuts and coffee. Then on December 19th, it all changed. We got the order, "Drop it, guys." The Germans had penetrated. The Battle of the Bulge had started on the 16th, but we didn't know anything about it until the 19th. We headed northeast toward the northern shoulder of the German breakout to take over the positions of the 99th Infantry Division. As we walked uphill toward where they had been, we saw evidence of what the hell had happened. I had never seen body parts before, but I did that day. We were in snow up to our buns, and it took our positions in the old foxholes dug by the 99th. It was about that time when we heard stories about the Malmedy massacre. The Germans shot over 100 of our guys there, right in the snow after they had disarmed them. One of the most barbarous acts committed during the Battle of the Bulge was when the Nazi SS troopers massacred 101 captured American troops near the town of Malmedy, Belgium. An aside, we visited that monument a year or so ago at Malmedy, my wife and I. That certainly scared us. Our outfit also told us to be aware of the fact that Germans had dropped paratroopers with excellent English language skills in GI clothing, and that we should challenge soldiers with questions that only Americans would know, like, who is Babe Ruth? That scared us even more. We were in holes and it was freezing up there. The most fearful thing that happened to me when I was when the lieutenant came up to me and said, "Barisi, pick out a half a dozen guys and go clear out that grove of evergreens," which was about a half a mile away. I said, "Are you kidding?" I asked. He said, "No." "Get going." Well, we went. Thank goodness nothing happened, but I want to tell you, that was pressure for a 19-year-old kid. Actually, the Germans never pressured us there. We were there about 3 weeks, and the skies cleared and our bombers came. After that, it was just a matter of time. And of course, Patton started coming in from the south, and it was over. But I will always remember that Christmas Eve. Every Christmas Eve, I always go back in my mind to where we were, there in the cold, all of us in holes, thinking about a white Christmas, but wishing we were having it at home. Thank you very much.
Well, after that doesn't cause you to buy a couple books, something's wrong. Thank you, Tom. Great story. I want to just have a few reflections, I guess, on today's generation. I was going to do this after giving the books out, but maybe I can get it through it better if I do it now. We drove across the country, been in San Francisco. 2 weeks ago today, we were at the signing of the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Japanese Peace Treaty. Jane and I were. And we were with our daughter Betsy. And it was a wonderful event. Those of you who fought in the Pacific, George Elder, you remember the hatred and the anger towards the Japanese. You remember them driving their planes into our ships. They wouldn't surrender. They believed the emperor was God. Does this sound familiar from a couple days ago? And they did whatever they were told to do. And they were told to take down as many American troops as they possibly could and not to surrender, and that's what they did. And there's men in this room that had to go deliver the firepower of America against them. And it wasn't fun. And I think part of the reason that a lot of GIs from the time had anger is American soldiers, sailors, and airmen are not born to be killers. And they had to do it and finish the war. And yet one of the great legacies of World War II is that our great enemies became our great allies. And if you think about how it happened, some of it goes, of course, back to the Casablanca Conference in 1942, in which you guys didn't even know was going on. Churchill and Roosevelt sit down in a couple of chairs over in Morocco, and they decide that the war is going to end only one way, with unconditional surrender. So part of the fault was ours. We weren't going to let it end any other way. But Roosevelt and Churchill, I think, had been through World War I when there was a partial peace and it didn't solve anything. It all broke out. and with the views of our enemies that they were super races, that they were going to dominate the world by force. In Japan, women had no right to vote. Women didn't go to school. Didn't have the right to go to school. The Japanese race considered themselves to be superior to everybody else in Asia. They went down through China with the arms. We all know about the German history with the death camps and Hitler and all the rest of it. And so Churchill and Roosevelt said, we're not going to end this war without unconditional surrender. And so that's why you guys had to go through what you went through, because it wasn't going to end any other way. But the great legacy, I think, is of the last 50 years. We took those two enemies, and they've been our greatest democratic allies in the world, which is a great, when you think about it, a great legacy. I came home from that, was in California when the bombing happened, and I said to myself, I wonder what these guys in this book and other World War II vets want to say to the generation today that just had their wake-up call. And I want to read one thing in the book, and I want to read a couple things that I believe will be engraved in a World War II memorial. The President has appointed a new commission. I'm no longer a commissioner of the American Battle Monument Commission. But I tell people, don't worry about it. My replacement's Tom Ridge. He's well qualified. So, and who knows if he'll be on the American Battle Monument Commission, because he just got a new call on television this week. But, and he's well qualified. He's a Bronze Star, 2 Purple Heart guy from Vietnam, and he's been down the trail in my war. But anyway, one of the things that I think is going to be in the World War II memorial, not this whole thing I'm going to read to you, but some of it's going to be there. And it wouldn't have been there if I hadn't have interviewed one individual in this room, because we've gotten thousands of pages of quotes about World War II from Army at Carlisle, from the Navy, the Air Force, from everybody, all the historians, and they've never come up with this. But Tony Costanzo, when he was on a ship from England heading down to North Africa, and they told them to shave their heads because head wounds weren't good, and they were all kids and they were scared, and Roosevelt didn't know if they could win. They were going up against the Germans. We'd never gone up against the Germans. This is 1942. These guys didn't even know where they were going. And they ended up, they were in Iran, Algeria. But Tony brought in this, it was in his service jacket. He brought it home from the war, and I have it now. Thank you, Tony. But this is what it says. It was written to members of the United States. This is what do you want to tell these kids today? Listen to what our war aims were. And I think this is probably what they need to hear. And I hope they read the book and find out what you've told them, I think, in the book. But to members, it's in the flyleaf of our book here. To members of the United States Army Expeditionary Force, you are a soldier of the United States Army. You have embarked for distant places where the war is being fought. Upon the outcome depends the freedom of your lives, the freedom of the lives of those you love, your fellow citizens, your people. Never were the enemies of freedom more tyrannical, more arrogant, more brutal. Yours is a God-fearing, proud, courageous people, which throughout its history has put its freedom under God before all other purposes. We who stay at home have our duties to perform, duties owed in many parts to you, the home front. You will be supported by the whole force and power of this nation. The victory you win will be a victory of all the people, common to them all. You bear with you the hope, the confidence, the gratitude, and the prayers of your family, your fellow citizens, and your president, Franklin Roosevelt. Every guy on those ships got that letter. And it came out of this. And it's, I think it'll be engraved in granite for 1,000 years, portions of it. What else would these veterans want to tell this generation? Let me just give you a couple of other quotes that I think will be in the memorial. Americans didn't go to war for territorial conquest. We went to war over ideas, over our way of life, over the defense of freedom. But it was brutal. We just went through that. And at the end of the war, on the 2nd of September 1945, the Japanese surrender, President Truman made this statement, which I think says a lot. I'm speaking to you at a high moment in history. The war has produced total victory. This is a time of great rejoicing and solemn contemplation. We can now turn to the grave task of preserving the peace. War must be abolished from the earth. Civilization cannot survive another total war. If this war we're getting into now ends up in a total war with nuclear weapons, this civilization will not survive another total war. Truman is right, and it's up to the young people, today's generation, people like David out there, who are going to have to make sure that we don't have total war, but they've still got to preserve freedom. It's not an easy task. And so he put the word civilization in there. Have you heard a lot of that in recent days? This isn't just us. It's a challenge to civilization. Then there's another quote. It came later on, a couple of years after the war ended, and George Marshall became Secretary of State. And the issue was to rebuild these enemies, to make them democracies. Here's what George Marshall said at Harvard. We find our nation in a world position of vast responsibility. We can act for our own good by acting for the world's good. The United States should assist in the return of normal economic health in the world, without which there can be no political stability and no assured peace. God forbid we ever go back to isolationism in this country. The world won't let us, I don't think, but we should take up the duties that we have as Americans, our worldwide responsibilities, not with arrogance, but with solemn commitment, because there's no other nation today that can pull the world from the edge, and we've got to do it. So I don't know, I maybe putting words in these guys' mouths, but that was sort of my take on what I would say at this point. And since I put this thing together, you have to put up with it. Thank you very much. We're going to distribute books to the veterans now, and Ken Furlow, the commander of the Ireloo Spring Post American Legion, and Sergeant David Adams, who's on active duty with the Army, and the son of Evelyn Adams, is here today, and I've asked them to give the books, and at the same time they're going to give you a World War II pin, the official pin of the World War II Memorial, which, by the way, you can see what it's going to look like later on if you want to come up, and we should be under construction sometime in November or December. So, as we do this, I want to go through the book, and the chapters go from the beginning of the war to the end. They flow from Europe to the Pacific to try and get, and you don't have to read it in one sitting. This is the good book to read every night. Read one chapter before you go to bed type of book, okay? But it does have a flow to it. The first book goes to Machinist Mate Second Class Joe Pontebianco at Pearl Harbor on December 7th in a chapter, The Day the War Began. And I would like Ken Furlow and David to come out and sort of stand in this area. One of them's going to give the book, one the pin. They'll pin it on you if you've got something to pin it to. And then these cameras can get a little picture of you guys, okay? So if you'll do it out here like this, I'd appreciate it. Okay, the next chapter is about how the whole world was consumed in World War II. There's two people in it. And the first went around the world by ship, on a command ship for the U.S. Army, Sergeant Samuel Penfield Price on the Ancon in a chapter around the world. Sam? Thank you. In the same chapter, went around the world by airplane, ferrying airplanes all over to Europe from the United States. And then he got transferred to fly the hump from India into China. Lieutenant Tony Mangine, U.S. Army Air Corps. Is Phyllis Skinner here? Is Phyllis here? I don't.
She couldn't be here.
Okay. You want to get this book for her later, Billy? I'll leave it up here. Her husband, Norm Skinner, died a few years ago and flew B-17s in the Arctic, of all places. And there's a chapter in the book called Fighting in the Arctic. Okay. D-Day, the invasion of Normandy. The Big Red One, the 1st Infantry Division on the 2nd Wave, Corporal Tony Costanzo, U.S. Army. We lost a lot of people on D-Day, but we lost a lot more when they tried to break out of the beachhead. And Bob Kerr, Sergeant Bob Kerr, 35th Infantry Division, the breakout from Normandy. Thank you. Margaret Marker is in a book called A Nurse's Scrapbook. Margaret died a few years ago. I sent a letter to her nephew, but apparently they couldn't come. He's out in the state of Washington. Ralph Pearson flew B-24s, died a couple of years ago, and I asked one of his kids, but I don't think, is there anybody here from the Pearson family? Mike McIntyre's son called from Fredonia. He couldn't make it today. And Mary Caprino, the widow of Joe Caprino, the wonderful story in the book about when the Leopoldville was sunk off the coast of France in 1944, and a lot of casualties occurred, and Joe Caprino jumped into the icy water, and Mike McIntyre was saving guys out of the water. And a few got saved, and who knows, it could have been Mike or Mac McIntyre that saved them. We'll never know, I guess, but they're not here. So we jump now to the Battle of the Bulge. Bob Steer, 106th Infantry Division, in the first part, a subchapter called Attack the Hammer Falls. And he fought for a week, ran out of fuel, food and ammunition, and spent the rest of the war in a POW camp. Bob Steer. Another individual, Jim Penhollow, can't be with us, 28th Infantry Division, same chapter, the Hammer Falls. His whole outfit was overrun, and I think 17 out of 120 in his company got back. Anyway, he's sick today. This next individual, I wanted to find somebody in the 101st Airborne who was surrounded in Bastogne, and I called the Legion, I called the VFW, I couldn't seem to find anybody. So Manly Anderson, a Post-Journal's here someplace today or was, and I want to thank them for their work because they put a little squib in the paper, and I got a phone call from Lloyd Schultz, Private First Class Lloyd Schultz, 101st Airborne Division, U.S. Army, surrounded, we will not surrender. We heard from Sergeant Barisi, Tom Barisi, in the same chapter, but a subchapter, Holding the Shoulders, Containing the German Advance, 1st Infantry Division. Sergeant Barisi. Is there anybody else here from the 101st? I don't think so. Thank you. Okay, and the last in that chapter in the Battle of the Bulge, second to the last, sorry, the counterattack, retaking the Bulge, PFC, Ron Putnam, U.S. Army, 2nd Armored Division. Thank you, Ron. The last person in that chapter, it's like a whole book, this chapter, isn't it? I told you. Private First Class Ron Putnam, U.S. Army. We just did Ron, sorry. Sergeant Phil Pelletier, U.S. Army, Rifleman, 75th Infantry Division.
His experience is almost parallel to mine. It's so funny because we've been friends for all our lives.
Now, one of the not-so-noble parts of our history of World War II is we had segregated units then. We didn't have integrated fighting units. And I wanted somebody who fought for the United States in a segregated unit. And let me just read you what I would like Corporal Vivian Taylor to come up, U.S. Army Europe, in a chapter, A Young Negro Goes to War. Vivian, would you please come up? And while you're coming, I want to read what I put. I wrote something in the front for all these guys, okay? You go out there where you're supposed to. Just stand. Let's wait a second. Here's what I said to Vivian, and I really believe this. Thank you for your story about what it was like as a black American in World War II. Because of your commitment and sacrifice, you laid the foundation for the post-war civil rights movement, which I think did come out of World War II. One of the great friends I made when I did these initial interviews isn't with us anymore, but his widow, his wife, is here, Elsie Johansson, for Sergeant Fred Johansson in the Office of Strategic Services, fighting behind the lines. He parachuted into France and Norway. Another good friend of mine that is in my church, I didn't know about what his story was, and when it was all done, his wife said to me, read the rough draft and said, "Raleigh, we didn't know any of this. We're glad you did this." So I'm glad I did it. Tech Sergeant Robert Putney, Infantryman, U.S. Army, 45th Division, the Italian Campaign. Okay, we have a very interesting little chapter about fighting on the other side, and I've got Pete Caprino, he was in the Italian Army. Gino Michiche was in the Italian Navy. But at the end of the war, Gino came over to our side, fought in a battalion at Monte Cassino with the British, and was awarded the highest Medal of Honor in the Italian Army, and he became an ally. Quite an interesting story. And so I'd like to give Gino, and I'm also going to give him Pete's book, and I'll have to get Mary's book later to you, I guess. I don't seem to see it here. Lieutenant Gino Michiche, Italian Republican Navy, fighting on the other side. Now we're out of Europe. Can you believe it? We're going to get out of here by 3 o'clock or close to it, so don't worry. We're heading into the Middle East now. Most people don't realize we had 40,000 troops in the Middle East and Iran in World War II. They assembled, there were 2 production plants over there making trucks, assembling trucks. The parts came to the United States, and GIs put them together. And 7,500 trucks loaded with ammunition went up into Iran and into southern Russia to help defeat the Germans. Huge effort. Private First Class Alan Finley, U.S. Army, Iran, Americans in the Persian Gulf. I'd like to ask Priscilla and Janet Robbins. Is Janet here? You can represent her then, Priscilla. We had 2 identical twins that went to war in the U.S. Navy, and they're on that. Put them in the Pacific side because most of their time was spent in the Pacific. In a wonderful chapter called "Identical Twins Go to War." Priscilla Robbins is here for her husband Bob, and I'll give you the other book also. Priscilla, thanks. And Priscilla, oh yeah, make sure you get one for your sister-in-law. Now Priscilla,
Yes.
we had to do a new book cover, which means your husband's not on the cover anymore, but I got some of the old covers for you. Okay, we're into China, Burma, India. Captain, not lieutenant, I was told today. Captain Charlie Price, China, Burma, India. 2 friends meet on the Burma Road. I wanted a fighter pilot. He lived across the street from me on Chestnut Street. Didn't even know his story until we talked. Lieutenant Commander Bud Fisher, fighter pilot, U.S. Navy, Hellcats in the Pacific. Bud, he's on the front page, folks. Yeah, I will. Okay. You know, one of the great stories of World War II is the production in this country and the supply effort to supply all these troops over there. When you have 16 million people in uniform, and they're all over the world, it's a big job keeping them supplied. By the way, and the guy I'm going to bring up here next just reminded me that this is not a very politically correct cover. They're smoking cigarettes. We had a big discussion of that. My editor, Joanne Schweik, who doesn't smoke, said, hey, we got to put it in there the way it is. We're not. So I think it's okay. Okay. Anyway, we have a chapter about supply and construction in the Pacific. Just one tidbit of information, for giving an example, in 4 years, the U.S. Army Air Corps took delivery of 279,000 airplanes. That's a lot of airplanes. That shows you the kind of production that went forth. Shipfitter, third class, Rolland Swanson, U.S. Navy Seabees, supply and construction in the Pacific. And Bob Olson in the same chapter. Bob, Tech 5th grade, U.S. Army, Port Battalion. A gentleman I met in politics, County Court Judge, Lieutenant Leetown Adams, U.S. Navy, submarines out of Midway, fighting beneath the waves. Three people that I'm going to announce couldn't make it because of health reasons. Joe Zanetta, 12th Armored Division, liberating the death camps. Will Purley, on battling the kamikazes. His ship almost got hit, did have some damage off the coast of the Philippines. Tony Duino, great chapter, coming home. It's not very well right now. And Tony was in a POW camp during the war, for the whole war. And I thought it was a great perspective to put in the book, and it was in our last edition, but they couldn't be here today. Corporal George Elder, U.S. Marine Corps, Iwo Jima, the hell called Iwo Jima. And finally, I think of those who are here. Guy sang in a church choir with, kept wearing this tie pin all the time, his tie class. It was a B-29, and I found out he was a waist gunner, a blister gunner, and a B-29. And it was his experiences, actually, of flying in the Pacific and firebombing Japan and the horrific parts of the memories of it that led him into the Christian ministry, and he was a Presbyterian minister and now retired. But Sergeant Carl Lenz, U.S. Army Air Forces, waist gunner B-29. Now, I gave these gentlemen a few extra World War II pins, and I see a couple World War II veterans out there. If you're a World War II veteran and are here today but not in this book, I'd like you to come up and have one of these World War II pins pinned on you. Jim, come on. You guys come up here. Now, before we have a benediction, did Greg Peterson make it? Is he here? He's around, but Bruce is here. So I just want to make sure that he's going to be handling the interviews. And if you had, I'm on the board of Robert Jackson, and we were going to also give you a little flyer about this center. I don't know if that got passed around, did it? Okay. And Tom, how much, or Ed, how much time do you need to reset up over there? Just 5 minutes? So 5 minutes to get up, set up for our interviews in that room over there, and the rest of you are all invited downstairs to have something to. I want to thank everybody for helping make this happen. I think it was a great event, don't you? And Howard is going to have the benediction, and then if we can do it, we're going to try to sing God Bless America. So.
May the strength of God sustain us. May the power of God preserve us. May the hands of God protect us, and the way of God direct us. May the grace of God comfort us, and may the love of God be with us now and forever. Amen.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Thank you.
Hey, before you leave, one little addendum here. Raleigh, thank you very much for the day. And now that you've all been singing and you're in good voice, how about happy birthday for his 61st birthday? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Raleigh. Happy birthday to you.
Well, thank you very much.
Phil, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, this has been quite the ceremony today.
Yes, this was really something after all these years.
Did you, and to see guys like Tom Barisi?
Well, Tom and I are old friends, and we see each other all the time in the course of business. He's with the Chamber of Commerce. I'm still with I still have the book nook. I go and bother them every day. My kids run it.
So all those things that you know all about him back in Silver Creek, do you care to share right now? All those, the stories that we never hear?
Well, we had some good times in Silver Creek. We didn't get into too much trouble, and we enjoyed it. We didn't need a lot to keep us amused in those days. I mean, if we had a bicycle and we had roller skates, even when we were older, that's all we needed. And sometimes we didn't have the roller skates.
Well, you're very politic in your answer. Nothing bad about Tom.
No, we were good kids. We didn't get any trouble.
You're featured in the book World War II, Hometown Went to War by Raleigh Kidder. And what was the portion that Raleigh featured in this book?
Well, he featured pretty much us going into combat. We were a new division, 75th Division. We were brand new. They called us the diaper division because we were so young. We left the States in October, went to Wales, and walked around the Wales countryside for a while until in December, all of a sudden they said, we're leaving, we're going to Southampton, going to France. We had no idea of the Bulge or anything else because, you know, we were the last people to know.
Sure.
So they put us on the troop train and boxcars. We were concerned we were going to have these hard wooden seats until we found out there were no seats, so we didn't have to worry about that. And we proceeded across France in jerks and fits. You know, the train would stop for a little while and call nature, and you jump off and then hope that, you know, the train didn't leave before you were ready to get back on. It was quite an experience. And it was cold. It was winter time. It was one of the worst winters that France had had. And we got to the end of the line. We got on trucks, and they were taking us up the front. They dumped us off the trucks. We start walking, and all of a sudden we got hit. And nobody told us, you know, like a football game, they'd blow the whistle and say, fellas, we're starting.
Right.
We thought we were still in the preliminaries. We had 8 single rounds of ammunition. Single rounds. And we were frontline infantry, which is what we were issued in New York City. Now, you know, with an M1 rifle, 8 rounds go in a clip. So at least if you put a clip in, you can go boom, boom, boom 8 times. We didn't even have that. We had single ones in our pocket. You know, take it out, put it in. So we got clobbered the first night. We lost a lot of people. And nothing we could do but retreat and regroup. And we went on from there until I was wounded in Appenware, France in February, and slight wound, very slight. But when going to the aid station, the first thing you do, you take your boots off to dry your feet, dry your socks, and get warm. And my feet just went, swelled right up. And that was the end of the war for me.
Then you sent back to the States?
No, we went to Colmar, hospital in Colmar, and then when they were crossing the Rhine, they evacuated the hospital and they brought us down close to Marseille. And then I was on my way back to the front and got the 75th Division the day the war ended.
So from your experience in World War II and your friends' experience in World War II, what message would you give to your children and grandchildren?
Well, I guess the best way to explain it is I hire a lot of young women who are college students, and you know, we talk and they say, oh yes, you were 18, you went to war, and now there's my male friends, they wouldn't be able to do that at 18. They're not ready. And I said they would be. And this is September 22nd today. And after the events of September 11th, I go back and talk to them. Now they better understand our feelings at that time and how we were ready to go. And I think the young people of today will be ready if they're called upon, and we hope to God that they're not, and that this thing ends quickly and we can return to being normal. And that's my hope for them. That's the only thing I can hope for them.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Tom, you've welcome. You've had a chance to listen to some of the things of Phil's experience, not only running from Silver Creek, but all the way to World War II. As you had a chance to sit down with Riley Kidder, what were your reflections that Riley picked up?
I think it's primarily frustration and not knowing what's going to happen. At the age of 18, you had little experience in life at that time in 1943. You went to high school, you were on the football and basketball and baseball teams, you went to the proms. Your way of life was pretty well sheltered. And then to throw young boys into a situation like that, which they had no choice. They had to do it. They had to call us up. And those that volunteered, our hats went off to them. And the draftees, there were hundreds of thousands of us. And they had to train us. They had to get us ready for something that was totally strange for us. War, killing someone else. And that doesn't come easy to us. Yeah, so it was just, you had to learn on the job. The training was fine, but they had to get people over to Europe and to the Far East because the threat was there, obviously.
I suppose nobody can teach you how you're going to react when the loss of your friends in the field.
No, it's, panic settles in, believe me. But I had friends that won the Congressional Medal of Honor who never thought they would do it, but that happened. They reacted somehow, which you'd never would expect.
Yeah.
And it was great to see it. But most of the time, it was the fear of the unknown, and to have someone in your sights, or you had an ambivalent feeling about it. You just, but you were there. You had to do it.
Right. It's a job. What's your message to your children and your grandchildren?
Well, as I speak to them constantly, they should get an education. If it were not for the GI Bill of Rights, I don't think I'd be here. But to treat yourselves and your neighbors and your parents with respect. If you respect yourself, things are going to work out for you. The younger generation that I spent 30 years, as you know, in education as a principal, those are good kids. Nobody tells us about the good kids. We hear about the kids that have problems. It's like a newspaper reporting on planes that land safely. It doesn't sell papers. They've got to get the other aspects. So let's start emphasizing the positive things that kids do. And the younger generation will meet any challenge that's thrown at them. I believe that sincerely.
It's terrific. Thanks, Tom.
You bet.
Appreciate it. Riley, well, congratulations again.
Thank you, Greg.
It's been a terrific ceremony today, and Riley Kidder is to be commended for sitting down and grabbing these personal stories, which are so remarkable.
Once again, he did a tremendous job of making the presentation, and I couldn't help but reflect back to when we put out, or he put out the first edition, and we were invited to Chautauqua. And what a wonderful feeling and emotions and appreciation of the people there, and also the veterans who were there and represented. So again today, it's great to get back with some of the fellows that, of course, we've known for years from school, and as we've heard here, the sheltered lives, and just going to school, and the comments that we've heard about the good children, and we don't hear of so much about them, but I think that the last 10 days or 11 days have brought out a lot of positive reactions from young people and probably some of the older. I know one of the fellows asked me today, what was your reaction when that, on the 11th of September? And I said, I couldn't help but recall the Japanese kamikazes coming into our camp on Okinawa, especially. We had it before that, but on Okinawa, toward the end of the war, all of the young Japanese who were sacrificing their lives, and the fear, and as we hear, you have the fear, but you've been trained, and you basically should know what to do. And these memories come back up into our minds, and we see George over here every once in a while, and I know he works with your dad, and the group of us fellows that get together with your dad and the group on Tuesdays, we don't talk about World War II. Not basically. It's a good time.
Yeah.
But today has been good. And it's good to see your cameraman and to meet his folks again.
Sure.
We've known them. So I think it was a good afternoon.
What did, when you talked to Riley, what was the highlight of this particular book? What did you want to make sure that he remembered?
Well, of course, my experience was in the Navy Seabees, the construction battalions, and there's not a great deal of, call it publicity or knowledge about the Seabees, and I was pleased when he asked if I would grant an interview and some pictures, and I felt that it was a good way to bring out some of the parts. I feel it was a small part that I had to do with the war and with the Seabees, but we had to, we served, as Raleigh has said, it was a world war, and the Navy Seabees served in anti-amphibious landing in Europe, the Aleutians, and of course primarily the Pacific. And from that, my interest in the history of the Seabees and the activities, Raleigh has brought that up in the book too. And now we look back and say we're proud to have been a Seabee. Once a Seabee, always a Seabee. But I think this was a nice afternoon. It's brought the people out again, it brought them together, and this is what we found again in the last 11 days, the camaraderie and the adhesiveness of the American people coming together. And I trust that we can do this without having to go through the devastations and the deaths and just the emotions of World War II.
Exactly. Great. This has been super.
Okay, thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Iwo Jima.
Oh, yeah. It's a hellhole.
Why was it the hellhole?
Well, first place, it was actually 5 miles long and 1 mile wide. And it was supposed to have been secured in 72 hours. It took 36 days. So that made hell.
Yeah.
Too many Japs and too many tunnels, holes. Didn't see anybody. Had to shoot at noises. But thank God I made it through.
There's an awful lot of fire blasting in the holes. I mean, it was just sort of just blowing them out of the...
Yeah. Well, you lit our guns and everything else. You could see a little firing from their muzzles, you know, and you'd shoot at that.
Is there an experience on Iwo Jima that's sort of been seared in your mind?
I don't know. Every day, every second was an experience.
Yeah.
It was just, every day was different.
You heard Tom talk about the fear factor. I mean, that just you after a while. I mean, just day to day, minute to minute. It was just a
I don't know of any fear.
Yeah.
When you're young,
yeah.
you know the job has to be done. You know there's no way out of there. You got to
Right.
fight your way out. You just fear kind of left your body.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just more or less was worried more about your buddy
Yeah.
than yourself.
When you sit down and are going to give a message to your kids, your grandkids about your experience in World War II and what World War II means, what would you say?
My wife gives them more advice than I do. I don't like to talk about it. If they ask a question, I'll get it to them. But they know where Iwo Jima was,
Right.
and still is.
Right.
They know most of the islands in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
They're educated to that.
Sure.
I'm just happy that they're not going to be called for this one.
Yeah. Yeah. Does this bring back emotion seeing what happened here the last couple of days?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. See that stuff folding in on those poor people. You got to be inhuman to not
Yeah.
to be sad about it.
That's right.
Yeah.
This has been terrific, George. Thank you for taking a few moments.
You're welcome.
Battle of the Bulge.
Right.
You were there.
I was there right at the start.
What's the memory you walk away from that experience?
Well, I guess there's a couple good ones. Memory, we ran out of food, we ran out of ammunition, it was cold, you know, bad. And we were moving a lot and digging in a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, we were surrounded. And we were surrendered by the colonel of our outfit. We didn't have individually, be taken by the Germans, but they had so much artillery firing in on us, and
Mm-hmm.
we got, we saw so many of them, and then the thing came down to break your rifles, break everything, not let them, in other words, not let them use it.
Right, right.
So that's what we did, and at a certain time,
Were you disappointed to hear that? I mean, was there a sense of, hey, we better throw in the towel on this one and lose the battle but win the war?
well, it's one of those things you see in the infantry, you never know really what's going on.
Right.
I mean, we knew what was where we were, but we didn't know what was going on maybe 500 yards away.
Mm-hmm.
But the amazing thing was a surprise that we went through. So much German everything,
Mhm.
men, tanks, everything they had. And nobody seemed to realize that it was that big.
Right.
And then, of course, after that, we were marched back for 2 days. And we saw everything that everybody talks about. Men laying there frozen, and
Mm-hmm.
nothing to eat. We didn't go out and maybe get a rutabaga or something and eat it. But then the big thing was in the program today. They mentioned Christmas Eve, and of course I'll never forget Christmas Eve because we were in the 14-8 cars in the siding and we were bombed,
Mm.
and those old cars went boom, 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 and it was really something. We didn't know if we were going to get out of that or not.
Right.
And then they took us on back, and then finally we got back into civilization.
Where were you on VE Day?
VE Day, well, after we had quite a story there at the, and I should tell these people about it. The Germans were going to move our camp. We were all, let's put it this way, we were all sergeants in this camp. I don't know if people realize the Germans are very class conscious. They had privates, non-commissioned officers, big officers, and that's the way we were separated, see.
Mm-hmm.
They were going to move our camp. We were all sergeants in this camp, sergeants and corporals. No officers, no privates.
Mm-hmm.
And they let word out that they were going to move us, which we knew they were doing because we had radios and we knew what was going on in the camp. So the fellows in charge of the camp I was in came up with this idea that we had made knives out of wood, had different things, You had time, so you'd sit there and whittle a knife.
I'll be there.
And so they figured that they'd get, I wasn't one of these top men, but they came out with the fact that when we moved, they would place the men that had the knives ever so often. At a certain time, there's going to be it's going to happen.
Sure.
Let's put it that way. And then they let it out to the Germans. Say, hey, what's going on here? They got scared, and they never moved us. We were one of the few camps that wasn't moved.
I'll be there.
And they were, they marched from back in further and stuff like that. Then the American Army came through, and we thought they were going to knock down the gates, and we were going to be free. They didn't do that. They put up guards.
Oh, was that right?
Yeah. See, people don't realize what happened. They put up these guards around us, and well, they didn't want us loose on the German countryside.
Sure.
See? And so they put up the guards, and then they ran out of manpower, so they had to ask for people to help them, from us.
Yeah.
Well, some of the guys were in pretty good shape.
Yeah. Oh, that's terrific.
Then-
Go
then
ahead.
Then they flew us out.
Did
We
they?
came back.
Terrific. What's the message you want to give to your kids and grandkids?
Well, freedom is a wonderful thing, and I think this tragic bombing in New York City is going to really wake us up. It's people have never seen such bombing like they did down there. Of course, as civilians. Of course, we saw it in the war, but
Right.
I mean, I hope that they kind of go after these fellows. I don't think they're going to do it bombing. I think they have to go in and get it. They have to somehow get it. But I think the people today are, when the time comes, there'll be another great generation. Has been that way all the way through. It's war is a terrible thing, and we always used to say back then, let the leaders go fight it out, and the people could watch them.
Well, thank you, Bob. This
Yeah.
has been terrific.
Take care.
Take care. Good to see you.
Nice to see you
Yeah,
again.
exactly. This was terrific today, by the way. You guys, it was just a wonderful ceremony and very meaningful.
I thought it was rather nice. I haven't indulged much in anything that represented military in many years because it's rather touching. And I tried to forget everything, but then along come Mr. Kidder.
Thank you.
And he's brought it out, and I'm glad he did because I think it's doing me a lot of good. And especially meeting these veterans that are here today from all different branches. And they went through the same thing that we did probably.
Now, the chapter that it's covered here in the book deals with Bastogne.
Bastogne. That's what it covers. Basically, it stayed with the Bastogne. It did.
Now, what memory from that experience sort of seared or stayed with you that Raleigh tried to capture here?
Every little event stays with you. Now, I've got to remark about that. How many times a veteran is told to forget it, put it in your past? Well, let me say this. If every teacher in the United States could instill the same feeling in all their students that one gets when they're caught up close in front of an enemy tank with just a rifle, it gets your attention.
Absolutely.
You can't forget it.
Yeah.
If it's anything to the people, like every battle that we went in, there's always a wiseacre when it's over and everybody is sitting back and licking their wounds. There's always a wiseacre to come up with something that kind of a smart thing to break the tension. We had a terrible, terrible thing happen last week. All I've heard is terrible, terrible, and sorrow. But did they ever stop and consider that there is one small as it is, good thing? It comes from all things. One good thing that happened from that battle, or it's a battle, last week, is that them rotten sucker, them terrorists, haven't got the guts to do it again.
That's right. That's right. If you had a message to give to your family as from your experiences in World War II, what would that be?
I've got to say, I tell everybody, work hard. When you train, train hard. Learn all you can learn because you're going to need it somewhere down the line. It's a tough life, no matter what you do. Whatever path you take, it's going to be tough. But work hard and give it your all. You will be happy.
That's terrific. That's terrific. Hey, I need to have you autograph this, Lloyd. This is part of the guest book here. Great. Lieutenant.
127, okay, I was looking 107.
It's special to have a guy from Forestville, New York, my wife's former boss, here today.
Yes.
And it's fun to read your story. And having talked to Raleigh, and having probably reread what he wrote about you, what is it that if you had to tell the camera that special experience that you had in the war that Raleigh tried to capture?
I don't know what special occurrence there is in any war. No day is that special except the ones that are too horrible to remember, and of which I haven't spoken for years and years because I don't want any more nightmares about being depth charged.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Was that tough for you coming back from the war? You're 19, after VE Day you come back, and to just kind of meld back into a normal routine. How could you possibly do that?
Well, I got married,
Mm-hmm.
came back, I now have applied to law school, had to go down to New Haven to be interviewed. I was still on terminal leave, so I could wear my uniform and be half price on the train. And I suppose that and the submarine dolphins and the combat insignia and so forth helped me get into Yale. Then I had to start making money to help put us through law school because $90 a month does not pay very much towards living in New Haven, even in those days. So I was much too busy to think about anything else.
And the next thing you know, married back. What brought you? I don't think that I know what brought you back here. Was this hometown for you?
I grew up in Silver Creek.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather was a lawyer there. He was our assemblyman in 1890.
Or was there?
My family has lived in western New York for closer to 200 than 150 years.
Wow.
All of my ancestors, except my grandfather Town, who was born in New Hampshire and didn't get out here until 1865. All of the rest of them were here in the 1820s.
I'll be there.
In fact, my great-grandfather Smith was born in Wyoming County in 1821.
So you're here. This is native soil.
This is native soil. Heck, when my grandfather was studying law, he studied with his cousin, the Cattaraugus County surrogate.
I'll be there. I'll be there. You're in the Robert Jackson Center here today.
Right.
Did your paths ever cross with his, or?
No. He, if you'll remember, went to Washington as counsel for the newly formed Securities and Exchange Commission in 1933.
Mm-hmm.
And whilst he did occasionally get back to Jamestown, I'm told it was very, very infrequently.
Mm-hmm. You didn't go to did you go to his funeral at all? Do you remember that? It was 1954.
I was unable to attend because it was a tickets-only venue.
I understand. It was quite a packed house. I've been asking everybody if there's a message to leave to your children, and I know them, or their children, your grandchildren. We
Got great-grandchildren now, too, remember.
Oh, my word. What would it be?
Well, it's this. I lost a lot of good friends in the war. I lost close to 20% of my sub-school class. And I would say to them, that was done. Now don't you let what they did get undone.
Terrific. Judge, before you go, I need your autograph. Do you remember your page? Well, thank you, and congratulations. They talk about Americans in the Persian Gulf.
Yeah.
What was your experience, Mr. Finley?
What was my what?
Experience.
Well, we didn't have any fighting in our area. We were at the southern part of Iran, and so that railroads came down to within, well, they came down to the docks, which is
Were you in Iran when the Tehran conference occurred?
yeah.
Oh, there, here's the picture. Yep.
That's a dock that the 7 ships could tie up to, and they even put some out in the river and used the crane on the ships to lower the heavy stuff, and then it went upstream to a place across from Basra,
Uh-huh.
which is in Iraq.
Right.
And then they put them on railroad cars and trucks, and of course, this is, like I said, the Shad el-Arab, but it's in 3 sections. See?
What was your role? What was your job there?
Me, I had various jobs. First was working on a ship.
Tell me about Jane Russell.
Jane Russell, she couldn't stand the heat.
You saw her, though.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, she was with Jack Benny.
Is that right?
And so the magazine said someplace in Italy. Well, when you look at the figures for this railroad car, then you know that they're not Italian writing.
Then you came back after the war. If you had to give a message to your children or your grandchildren about the war, what would it be?
Well, I'd say that stand up for your rights.
Well, that's terrific. Thank you.
In fact, this fellow, I didn't know he was there until after I got back to the States and was home.
How ironic.
But he,
This is Norm Van Vleck, right?
yeah,
Mhm.
his place of business was on this road that goes down to the place where I was guarding, and they assembled the trucks in that building.
That's all right.
And he was in charge of that, and also getting drivers to learn how to drive them, and they'd fill them up and load, and then he'd take them north into Tehran. From Tehran, they'd either go to the left or to the right.
I just wanted to take this opportunity one more time to thank the veterans who gave us their stories for this book. The wonderful expression of their patriotism, the reasons they went to war, I think are going to be lessons for future generations. A great Jamestowner and lawyer, Robert Jackson, at Nuremberg at the end of World War II said the following: "The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated." Had it not been for the veterans of World War II, these people would not have been brought to justice. And as the grandchildren and children of these veterans read this book and consider what their grandfathers did back at the time of World War II, I hope they realize that freedom is not free, that it must be defended, and that there will be other people like Hitler and bin Laden and many others coming down the road in history, and that these stories from World War II will help them understand how at least one generation of Americans stood up to defend the principles which have made our country strong.